Hello and welcome to episode 86 of the Page One podcast. I'm Marco.
I'm Tarek.
And thanks for joining us at the Page One podcast, where we like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing careers, how they got into the industry, and try and get as many hints and tips from them as possible. And of course, this is our first episode of the new series, Tarek.
Season 9.
Indeed. And what have you been up to in the meantime? Just busy becoming a best-selling author?
Best-selling ebook only, of course.
Of course.
I believe that's only metric I measure success by. Moving house, having a baby. It's been quite a hectic few months, actually.
Yeah.
How about yourself? What about anything exciting you, Marco?
No.
You've got a dog?
Yeah, I had the dog before, and you might be able to hear the dog in the background, so apologies if that's the case. But for those of you who don't know, if you didn't tune into the last episode of the last season, Tarek's book, Welcome to Cooper, is now out and doing very well in the Amazon charts. So if you haven't had a chance to check that out, do that. Would you say so, Tarek? I
would absolutely agree with that. I don't need bias, but it's probably the best book I've read in a long, long time. Oh, there's the dog.
There's the dog there. Yeah, thank you. Anyway, on to this season, and we kick it off with a great guest.
Yeah, really, really fun guest. This week we're chatting with Alan Johnson, who he was an MP for 20 years. He was a Home Secretary and the Secretary of State for Health for Labour, for Blair and Brown. And after he left the cabinet, he then wrote his first memoir called This Boy. It was an instant success, and he followed up with two more volumes of work. But more excitingly for me anyway, he's now just launched his first novel, The Late Train to Gipsy Hill. Yeah,
which, as Alan tells us, is sort of inspired by the Litvinenko case, and what might have been if certain things had happened differently there. So it's a really well written thriller.
Which a Hitchcocky feel to
it does. Yeah. We discussed that sort of. I think you compare it to The Third Man in the episode, which is a good comparison to make, I think, with the type of story that it is.
That sounds like a very intelligent to me. Are you sure that was me?
Maybe I'm misremembering. No. Maybe that was Alan himself. But no, it was a really fun. It's a really fun chat that we had with Alan. We talked to him about, he has always wanted to be a writer, and had ambitions to be a rock musician as well. And we even managed to speak to him about being a contestant on The Masked Singer,
which I have to say is a show I've never watched, but we'll definitely check the episode out now. I know Alan Johnson's.
Yeah, exactly. I think you can actually see a clip on YouTube of his final performance. But anyway, we won't spoil the podcast too much, so we'll get straight into it after a quick advert for our Page One notebook. And if this is your first episode, the notebook is a sort of writer's aid, because Tarek and I are both writers, divided into different sections to help you plan your novel. And we're currently going through a second print run, which of course has been delayed thanks to Brexit, COVID, and various other things. But it is coming, so we'll play the advert. You can check it out on the website, and then we'll get straight into the interview.
And I believe if you pre-order now, you get a little 10% discount.
That is absolutely correct.
But anyway, on with the podcast. That's my dog.
The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome. But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear? Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying? And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the third act? Think about all those top thrillers you like to read, or that amazing drama you just watched. What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying, or a document on our laptop so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realise it's not just a story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page One. Page One is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with page 1.
What I normally do is ask, did you always want to be a writer? But obviously you started out very differently. Am I right in saying you started as a postman and then obviously moved into politics?
Shelf stacker at Tesco's when I
right, okay.
I did want to be a writer.
Mm-hmm.
I have always wanted to be a writer.
So I mean, well, I suppose the next question from that is, if you harboured that ambition, what is it that took you so long to actually fulfil that as a dream?
I wanted to be a writer. I mean, when the Beatles' 6th single, Paperback Writer, came out in 1966, I did actually want to be a paperback writer. I was 15 at the time. And my book is dedicated to my English teacher, Peter Carlin, who is still alive. He came into my life when I was in the 4th form, what we'd now call Year 9. Mm-hmm. And he saw my stupid stories about Inspector Andrews and a character called Mr. Midnight, loosely based on The Saint by Leslie Charteris. And he said, why don't you send them off for publication? And I thought that was an amazing thing to try and do, but he got an old copy of the Artists and Writers Yearbook, mm-hmm. which is published annually, still is, even in this internet age,
yeah,
with the address of every magazine and obscure magazine in the country. And so I sent them off, got the inevitable rejection slips. Mr. Carlin said, look, don't give up, Alan. Every writer gets rejection slips, try again. And, many years later, I tried again. And the great thing is Mr. Carlin's still alive. He's 90, living down in Bath. So he was too frail to come to the book launch, but he's there to mark my homework all these years later.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Brilliant.
But, I wanted to be a rock musician and I wanted to be a writer.
And you ended up as a politician.
I ended up as a total failure.
I mean, I did want to touch on your time in politics. Obviously, as I mentioned before we started recording, we had Alistair Campbell on as a guest before. And obviously, it seems like a very all-consuming thing to be involved in politics to that level and the level that you were at. Were you writing at the time as well? I know we'll come to you writing your memoirs, but I mean, throughout that period, were you writing or were you just having to concentrate on the job, as it were?
Yeah, I was writing the speeches.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Servants kind of do a draft. So I had a speechwriter, a guy called Simon Lancaster, but I would never leave it alone. I always wanted to move it around. But sometimes you're making 4 speeches in a day, mm-hmm. and you've got the red box to do, and you've got all your constituency stuff as well, because you're doing 2 jobs when you're a government minister. You're an MP as well. So really, I didn't write seriously after my fabulous Inspector Andrews and Mr. Midnight stories. I just wrote a few little stories for my kids as they were growing up, but that was the only time I used my imagination. And so it wasn't until 2013 when This Boy was published, well, 2 years before that, when I started to write that, when there was interest in an Alan Johnson book. But that was memoir. So that was, a feat of the memory rather than a feat of imagination. But it meant I could string a sentence together.
Yeah.
Those won a lot of awards. But I was really keen to get to fiction because that was the rock face to climb. I mean, to me, you couldn't call yourself a writer or an author, no matter how many prizes you'd got from Royal Society of Literature or whatever, if you hadn't developed plot and character. That to me was real writing, because that's the writing I've read all my life, fiction. I've read fiction all my life, love fiction. And that was the big challenge.
And there must have been quite a difference writing even the memoirs and the fiction compared to
the scripts and the speeches, etc. Because I imagine with the speeches, it's going through so many hands. There's so many people involved in it. Whereas it's largely just you writing it yourself when it comes to the memoirs and the fiction.
Yes, I don't think I could have written the memoirs if I was still a government minister. So once the electorate dispensed with our services in 2010, I was an MP then, but all that time that ministerial life took up was suddenly free to do something else, and that was to write in the memoirs. But you're right, the glory of it was, apart from speeches, you have to write articles for newspaper, which generally are prepared for you by civil servants, but I used to change them around. And even after that had finished in 2010, if I was writing a piece, as I'd been the education secretary and the health secretary, I was always being asked to comment on what was happening. But there'd always be a restriction. The Daily Mirror wants 250 words. The Guardian, if you were lucky, want 1,000 words. You could never expand. You always had to keep within those tough deadlines. So when it came to the memoirs, even before the fiction, the fact you had all that space to write in, which sometimes, 80,000 words is daunting, isn't it? I mean, you've done it. When people say to me, I remember Steve Wright in the afternoon when I did this thing on Radio 2 with him, he said, "What are you doing now?" After I stepped down from Parliament. I said, "I'm writing." He said, "Yeah, but what are you doing?" As if writing not a proper job. Yeah. He's writing something you polish off over a tea break. I said to him, "You try doing 80 things." So that ability to expand was really important and totally different to what I was used to in politics.
But did those restrictions that you had from the political writing and the articles and stuff, did that in some way help you with the discipline? Although you had the room to expand with memoir and subsequently fiction, does it help you in your approach in any way, sort of the structure or planning or anything like that?
I don't think so. No, I think the only thing that helped me was reading. So, every book I read was an education as to when it came to writing. When you read really good books, there was a memoir, not very well known, by a guy called Paul Bailey, called An Immaculate Mistake. And Paul Bailey, who's quite a senior BBC person, his childhood memoir, it was called An Immaculate Mistake because he came along when his mum was 40, early 40s, and she always called him an immaculate mistake. And he described life in what was Bermondsey, southeast London, as a child. And I thought he did it so beautifully and so evocatively. In a sense, that was my inspiration when it came to writing this boy. But I don't think I learned anything from being a government minister. A bit of it's come in handy for the thriller, having been a Home Secretary and all that, but not a lot of it. I could have written it if I'd never been Home Secretary, frankly.
Well, I mean, we'll definitely chat about the fiction shortly, but I wanted to first chat about this boy and the other memoirs that you wrote. And what was it that made you want to write them in the first place? Was it someone that came to you and said and asked you to do it, or was it something you kind of wanted to put out on paper yourself?
Well, I was very lucky in that, unlike most writers, publishers were coming to me keen to get a book. And I got myself an agent, American guy called Andrew Kidd. And Andrew said to me, that most of the requests were about my political life, the traditional political memoirs, which I hate, incidentally. I mean, they bore me solid. They're always about, going back to refight old battles that everyone's forgotten about. And Andrew said to me, "Why don't you just write about your childhood? Don't write anything about your political life. Just write about your childhood." He knew, I had rather an interesting childhood. And that put the idea into my mind. So, the first one finishes when I'm 18. Not only am I nowhere near political life, I'd left school, failed in 2 rock bands, but had made a record when I was 16 and was married with 2 kids and 18. And that was that was the end of this boy. And it was supposed to be a one-off, but then it sold very well and is still selling very well. And people said, well, how did you get from there to there? So then the idea for Please Mr. Postman, and then to finish it off, what is as close to being a political memoir, I suppose, of the trilogy, which is The Long and Winding Road, My Life into Politics. But even there, one of the reviewers complained that I only spent 40 pages on my 11 years as a government minister. That's deliberate. I mean, to me, that's the least interesting bit. The most interesting bit are the people I work with, the government car service drivers and the kind of, I suppose, demystifying some of the stuff around politics as well, rather than the various positions I had. So 40 pages, it ends just as I'm becoming Home Secretary, basically because I can't write anything about when I was Home Secretary that doesn't have to pass through civil service, and anyway, that's the kind of stuff I can't even talk to my wife about, the things I knew about there. I certainly can't write about them. I signed the Official Secrets Act when I was a postman, by the way, because post office then was part of the civil service up until 1969. So when I became a minister and they said, you have to sign the Official Secrets Act, I said, I already have. So,
obviously, Alan, you can tell us here. We'll just cut it out. It won't be here. Feel free to talk. That's totally fine.
Bad things, very bad people. Three ingenious things that MI5 that I was once responsible for did to catch bad people were quite astounding. I wish I could put them into. I might weave them into a plot somewhere.
Yeah, I would have thought that was. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a nice segue into the Late Train to Gipsy Hill, which is the novel. Do you want to tell us a bit about what the novel's about, first of all?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll give you the genesis of it was the Litvinenko case. I was in the cabinet as an education secretary, so nowhere near Home Office or Defense Department, whatever. Just watching it as part of, like everybody else, it was an incredible thing to have happened. But I did wonder, because it was said that Litvinenko was served this tea in a London hotel by a waitress. I did wonder, what if the waitress had mixed up the order and given the wrong tea to the would-be poisoner, so that in effect they poisoned themselves? And that idea was floating around a lot over a number of years. And at the same time, this will make me sound like a real old fogey. You guys are much younger. This won't have been astounding to you, but I took the train in every morning from Gipsy Hill, where I lived in Crystal Palace when I was an MP, to Victoria, walked down Victoria Street to the House of Commons. And on the train in the morning, I suddenly noticed this phenomenon to me of women doing their full makeup on the train in front of everybody else. I don't remember that when I was a kid and I used to travel around on the underground a lot, It seemed to me something that had developed. And the fact that, first of all, the process, which looked so convoluted, of pots and brushes and the fact they were totally in their own world, as if they were still in their, boudoir, as they would call it in a Regency novel. I just was fascinated by that. And the two things went together, because the story is, a waitress serves the wrong coffee and the would-be poisoner becomes the poisoned. He's a Russian, very linked in with organized crime. And his Russian colleagues, don't appreciate how easy that mistake was to make. They want to talk to this waitress. And in the end, she's on a train, late train to Gipsy Hill. And Gary Nelson, who's my hero, who's a kind of just a working class guy from Aylesbury in Buckinghamshire, moved to London seeking excitement and adventure. All he found was monotony in a dull job in Covent Garden in accounts payable. And he's too shy. He's always noticed this girl doing her makeup on the train, too shy to talk to her. Sees her one night, got a seat next to her, empty. He sits next to her and she shows him the compact mirror that she's doing her makeup in, but she's scrawled on it in mascara, "Help me." And then Gary gets all the excitement and adventure he could possibly want, because the Russians are on the train looking to snatch her, and he finds a way to escape them. But then not only are those Russians from Krobny Bratya, which means Blood Brothers in English, organised crime. The FSB, successors to the KGB, are quite keen to talk to her as well. And the Metropolitan Police are quite keen to talk to her. And there's a bent copper there who's working for Crodney Braccia. But, people have asked me at the book festivals I've done, oh, are you saying there's police corruption? I'm not saying that at all, but I'm saying that there might be the odd copper that is open to inducements, as this copper was. So there's a bent copper in there as well. So all human life is there.
So it's a proper kind of Hitchcock feel to it, isn't it? That kind of convoluted man gets drawn up in a conspiracy, above his level, etc.
Bit of that. It's been 2 reviews: the Irish News and the Irish Times this morning, and another one, I think it was in the Sun, the current Bun, for goodness sake, who said it, likened it to the 39 steps. Well, that'll do for me.
Yeah, that's exactly what came to mind as well. Exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've got a lot of strands to pull together there. Are you someone, even with your memoirs and your fiction, do you sort of sit down and plan it out beforehand, or do you have the idea and just sort of start writing and see where it goes?
Well, I was fascinated by that book you told me about, Marco, where you could that you're going to kindly send me. I might use that for characters and all that. I kind of scroll down in the back of a pucker pad the main characters so that I remember as I go through. And I had an idea. I mean, I've only written the one. I'm not an expert. Actually, 1.5, because it's a 2-book deal and I'm halfway through the second one. But I understand the need to keep it all together and to remember what you've said, but not much more. The twists and turns happen, and you're writing something, and you think, no, I want to go off in this direction. And the beauty about fiction is, of course, you can. Although I don't know how, the great writers of the 19th century, like Dickens and Wilkie Collins, who serialized it, they've already got it out in print. They can't change anything.
Yeah. No, exactly. Yeah,
I can go back and change it. So it's a bit more difficult for them, I guess. But no, I mean, you talk to loads of writers. You tell me, is there a writer that plots it all out from beginning to end, has all the characters there, and then just puts it on paper?
Some people do, for sure. Some folk, I mean, there seems to be a proper variety of approaches. Some people, like yourself, don't really like to know exactly where it's going, but some people like to plot it down to the last minute. We chatted to one guy who kind of would do a framework of all the dialogue and then fill in the bits around it. And some of those, the strangest methods, but obviously works for some people. But it's it's very interesting. It's difficult to find people who have exactly the same sort of process. Everyone seems to bring their own little idiosyncrasies to it.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a rough idea of where it's going to go, but then it kind of changes sometimes.
What some people say as well is that, they don't want to plan it out in that much detail because it kind of takes the enjoyment of the story away from it. If you have to, if you plan out every single scene and all that sort of stuff, it takes the spontaneity away, as you say, that your characters can go off in a completely different direction than you thought they might at the start. So that's part of the fun of writing, I think.
Yeah, I think so. And I do have a lot of fun writing. I can tell you, it's more fun than politics.
And does that mean that your method of writing, does it lead to a lot of drafts, a lot of redrafts as you go back and tweak things from the start to fit the end, etc.?
Yeah, but that was the same with the memoirs. Someone said, I forget who, that no one's a writer, they're a rewriter. And, that rewriting process is really, really important. I guess my books have all gone through, like the 4 I wrote even before this, might have gone through 4 or 5 different drafts. I can't read it without finding a different way of expressing it. Even now it's published, too late now. I could have said this a different way. So in a sense, you can get carried away with it and overdo it.
Yeah.
I think that redrafting thing. So I handwrite first of all, because that seems to work for me, from the brain to the hand. But then when I put it onto the computer, it's first it's redrafted there, then it's redrafted on there, and then when I look back through it, it's redrafted again, and then it'll be redrafted, and then the editor, when it's being edited, they'll get hold of it. So yeah, I think you're always polishing and planing. It's like a carpenter, isn't it?
Yeah. But as you alluded to there, I think there is a it can be difficult sometimes. You can be too close to it, and you can always think you want to keep polishing it and keep polishing it. And there does come a time when you have to sort of hand it off. And I suppose that's the editor's role in a way, to say,
I suppose
this doesn't.
It becomes too much of an obsession of, effect. I mean, I'm not after the Nobel Prize for bloody literature. Every time you want it to be as taut as well. I mean, this issue about, I read a lot of Maigret. Georges Simenon is probably the detective books I read the most. And golly, he was good at kind of boiling it all down and, not having too much superfluous stuff in there, which is always a temptation.
And the handwriting, is that a nice way to kind of slow things down as you're writing it? I think it's quite easy when you're typing to kind of blast through that, especially the first draft, to kind of like just throw it down. But I imagine when you're handwriting it, it's a lot more slower. You've got more time for thoughts to percolate as you're writing it.
Well, I'm not all that quick on the keyboard. Not because all of this new technology all happened while I was a minister, and there were other people to draft things for me, and I had personal assistants and private secretaries and all that. So I didn't do a lot on the keyboard. So I'm not all that quick on it anyway. So actually, I'm probably faster handwriting. It's just, the crossing stuff out and thinking again and all that. It's just a process that seems to connect my hand, with the pen in my hand to my brain more than the keys. Although I think I can. I mean, I might gradually just move on to, given that I'm going to be writing, whether anyone publishes it or not is another thing. I'm going to be writing. I might actually have a go at just doing it on a keyboard because it is quicker when you've got a deadline,
Yeah.
And do you've written the memoirs and you've written the fiction. You said at the start that you thought you're not a real writer until you've written fiction. Did you find each process equally enjoyable, or was it the fiction that you really enjoyed the most?
Fiction I enjoyed the most. I've had a ball with the fiction, but I had no deadline on this one because my publisher, Transworld, my agent showed them the first 3 chapters and they said, "Oh, can you set it in the 50s? It seems too kind of old fashioned." Mm-hmm. And I said, "No, I can't." And so my agent said, "Well, just finish it and we'll see what other publishers are interested." And in the end, Transworld were interested, but Wildfire got in first. And for Transworld, I mean, they've got Dan Brown, they've got Lee Child, they've got Paula Hawkins, they've got all these writers. I'd have been low down, probably, they're great publishers, and they published my first 4 books, so I've still got a good relationship with them. But Wildfire were kind of young and hungry, and they just blew me away with their enthusiasm for the book. So in the end, I was fortunate. There was a bit of an auction, but I had time to finish it, and I had COVID, which terribly has been a terrible thing for many people. It was a good thing for me, sense of concentrating on it for that intensive period.
Yeah. And what was it like working with an editor and an agent? Doing handing in drafts, getting notes back from them, and was it similar at all to? I suppose it was almost the other way around. You were the one giving notes to your speeches, but now you were getting notes on your work a little bit.
We didn't really do it that way. It was finished. Wildfire took it on as the transcript that was sent to all the publishers by my agent, and then the editing process was very simple. There was some really good suggestions, and really, as always with these guys, really insightful. And it didn't take long. With the memoirs, it took much longer because there were all kinds of legal checks on it, and didn't seem to happen with this. The lawyers were very interested to crawl all over the memoirs, and no one was, because this is fiction, I suppose. There wasn't too much of that in the process, so it was quite an easy. I've never done a book, not even this second book, where I hand the drafts in and then they hand them back, like my homework to Mr. Collins. Yeah. They just, at the end of this now, which I should have handed it in, but it'll be about the end of the year, they'll come back with their suggestions in one go, and that's much more manageable.
Yeah.
And obviously you said you're working on the next book, which presumably you do have a deadline for. So have you found that more difficult working to that deadline? Yeah.
Yes, I wish I had longer and I could relax, because suddenly, so it was 2-book deal done last October, November. Second book had to have the same detective. That was the proviso.
Mm-hmm.
And the second book was to be completed by September. I had the idea for it straight away, started writing it before Christmas and thought, oh, this will be a doddle.
Mm.
Getting 80,000 words done is not a doddle. Even with lockdown 2 and all that, I find, what am I? I'm at about 40,000, and I've just broken that news to the guy, the great guy Alex Clark, who's head of Wildfire, and he didn't fall to the floor sobbing. So I said, let's the end of the year, I hope, but that's going to be tough as well, because I'm now out promoting the book. I've just back from a little tour, mini tour. So that's harder, I probably got to discipline myself not to do so many redrafts that we were talking about earlier.
And is the stress with writing to a deadline when it comes to fiction, is that kind of is it a writer's block issue? Is it just to find the time? Is it just the fact that you didn't have much time to write it? Is there, because I imagine writer's block is something you didn't really have to worry about when it came to the memoir stuff, but it's something that you might have had to think about here.
I didn't have to worry about it too much then, no. And I was doing the other job for at least 2 of them, so still an MP. No, it's just that with fiction is different, isn't it? Because of all those different options you can have, because of I've just introduced a new character into the book I'm writing now, and I'm really excited about it. It seems to me it's a whole new kind of bit of energy.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think of this earlier on, and I thought, oh, this will be a good character. So no, it's just the process of thinking it through. I mean, I do about 4 or 5 hours a day, start about 7:30. Don't set myself any, I'm not trollop, used to, whatever it was, 1,000 words every half hour. God, that'd be, I start, by the time I'm kind of exhausted about 12:30 and nothing's kind of coming anymore, that's the time to go away. So there's no set pace. And I've enjoyed every minute. There was no writer's block, Tariq, you were talking about. I've not had a writer's block.
Oh, that's good.
Simply that process of thinking it all through and then getting it right and then doing it. I mean, I think I've done bloody well to do 40,000 words by now, actually, in what, not far off a year, 10 months. But at that rate, it's going to be quite a long time before it's finished. But I think the publishers generally, take this into account. I don't think, I was talking to a guy at one of my book launches that promised to produce a book for Transworld, who was my publisher, years ago. It's a guy called Robert Crampton, who writes a column for the Times, Saturday Times, and he's a mate of mine because he comes from Hull. He was at the book launch, and my Transworld approached him while he was there, said, what about that book? 10 years ago. He was 10 years over his deadline. And I thought, well,
I suppose they want it done right. There's no point putting out a book that's not properly finished and stuff, because it looks bad for them as well. So they want the book to be the best it can be, I suppose, don't they?
Yeah, but there again, I know, Wildfire are telling their marketing team.
That's a flip side, isn't it? Yeah, that's a bit the machine at work.
America and Australia and New Zealand as well. They've got, it's Hachette, who is the second biggest international publishers to Penguin Random House. So I understand that they've got their and they market very well. They use social media very well. And if I'm buggering it up by not having the product, to use that terrible term about a work of art, as I would call it, rather poncily, then I've got to try my best. It's not for what.
As you say, I think they must build a bit of that into their schedules.
Yeah, they must do.
But so is this you for good now? This is you want to? Are you going to keep producing more fiction?
Yeah, I enjoy everything about it. I enjoy everything about it. There's nothing I enjoy. The thing I enjoy most as well is going to book festivals afterwards. I mean, there's nothing like that in politics.
Yeah.
My publishers tell me, there are writers who, by their nature, I suppose, are very isolated and quite loners and don't like dealing with with book festivals and people and all that. I can understand that. Me, I mean, try and shut me up. I love all that side of it. To go to, because there's nothing like that in politics now. There's no public meetings now in politics. And if there were, you'd have a large group of people there who were quite hostile to you.
Yeah, I was going to say it would be a slightly different crowd.
Slightly different crowd. Whereas here,
question time type situation.
Yeah. Whereas with books, they're all coming along because they quite like your stuff.
Yeah.
The more you've had published.
And is the future fiction stuff are you going to keep writing with the same characters, or are you like trying to experiment and branch out?
Well, I say I don't want to, but when Wildfire make you the offers, they make you.
Yeah.
Go with it. Well, Christ, okay. I like detective. I love thrillers.
Mm-hmm.
I think there is a certain snobbery about these things, isn't there?
Yeah.
I don't think a thriller has yet won the Man Booker Prize, for instance. And I've read plenty of thrillers that would, to me, is great literature.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I've got this idea for historical fiction. Every time I mention it to my agent, it was a wonderful woman, Claire Alexander, her eyes glaze over. I mentioned it to Penguin Random House, their eyes glazed over. But I think it's a great idea, and I want to get round to that at some stage. But if this one's successful, like the second one, and that I get another book offer for.
I mean, there's definitely a market for. So, is it a historical thriller? Is that what it would be? Would it be a thriller?
Yeah, thriller, but it's a historical fiction. I'm not quite Hilary Mantel, but there's an area called the Isle of Axone, right, which you'd have never heard of, and don't apologise because no one has. But it's a vast land with this amazing history of the guy who drained it all. In the 17th century, and the kind of things that went on here. He was a Dutchman who brought 600 Dutch workers over. Their names are all over the Isle of Axone, which is just where I live. And I'm just amazed that no one's told his story. He changed the course of the River Don, for Christ's sake, in 1627. I mean, talk about a feat of engineering. The run up to the Civil War, Charles I brought him out. It was his land, the Isle of Axone. So you've got that element as well, Cromwell and all that. But it will take a lot of research. So I know when I'm sitting down to do that, I've got at least a year's heavy reading before I even start. But it's still there as an idea.
No, I like that. I'd definitely read that, Alan.
Yeah. Well, you're the only people whose eyes haven't glazed over. Use my inspiration.
And I need to ask before the end, have you got any other plans to appear on something like The Masked Singer again?
Well, if they'd have me back again, yeah. I thought gracefully treated. I was beaten by a tree that turned out to be Sheringham. That was a wonderful experience because I always wanted to be a rock star. And I haven't given up yet. But that, because you were in that costume, you had no qualms about singing out when nobody knew who you were. It was a new program. And although I was the second one turfed off, because they just started to get interested, the media, I had all these interviews as if I won it, I got a lot of publicity now. And it was just great fun to do. But you film it all in September and it's shown in January. And you have to practice and rehearse 6 songs,
right,
in case you get through to the final. And the worst one, Walk Like a Bloody Egyptian, which was our outfit. Difficult to sing, by the way. And not that I'm a great singer. That was the worst one. I had all these great ones to come. Use when I'm on the second time now.
Excellent.
So do you pick the songs, or do they say these are the songs that you're going to sing?
Well, they give you a kind of list, and then you can suggest a few, and they say, a bit like the civil service, that's very interesting. And then they just give you the one they wanted you to have. But to a certain extent, you do pick your songs, which is why and you work with these musicians, these fabulously talented musicians. As I said, because you've got it already, all 6 of them, and then you fall at the first fence, as I did.
Yeah, it must have been how did the opportunity come to you? As former Home Secretary, it doesn't strike you, we must get him on the show kind of a thing.
God knows. My agent, I got a media agent and a literary agent. My media agent said, we want you to do this bizarre program that started in South Korea and kind of very popular in America.
Yeah.
Where Donny Osmond won it, by the way, for their first series. And I took a look at a few of the pictures from the American one, and I thought, oh, that really does look like fun. So when people were saying, why do it? I would say, why not?
No, totally. I mean,
absolutely.
An absolutely brilliant laugh. Yeah, it'd be great fun.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was a real hoot.
Theresa May on next season, then, you think? Is that...
Poor Theresa, yeah. I can't see her being on The Masked Singer. I don't know why. I just can't place with her.
What was the last book that you read?
The Good Patient by Damon Galgut, South African writer. Highly recommended. You know, every time you read a book that is just so amazing, you want to recommend it to everyone. It happened to me with Remains of the Day by Ishiguro years ago, Stoner by John Williams, and now this, The Good Patient, Damon Galgut.
Brilliant. Oh, nice one. And what about the last film that you watched?
The last film that I watched, which was a contemporary film, as opposed to all the stuff I've been watching on telly through lockdown. Last cinema experience. I think it was what was it? The one about Wall Street, The Wolf of Wall Street.
Oh yeah.
Quite a while ago. That was my last cinema experience, but they've been shut for a long time. So.
And what about a TV show that you last watched or are watching?
I love The Sopranos. We rewatched all of that. A lot of the Danish Scandi noir I've been watching. That series, The Terror, about the ship.
Yeah, that was excellent. Yeah,
absolutely brilliant. And the North Sea, not the North Sea, the North
Waters, is it?
The Colin Farrell. Yeah.
It was written by a guy from Hull, where I live, and
nice.
Which was my constituency, and looks like a brilliant. I haven't watched it yet, but that's my next one to watch.
On The Sopranos as well. There's the Sopranos film coming out, I think, next month.
Yeah. That was a masterclass, wasn't
Looking forward to that.
No, it looks excellent.
Line of Duty, of course, which everyone watched.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. Brilliant. Well, the very, very last thing we do is a super quick fire either or, and I always say there's no right answers apart from one. So the first one is the Beatles or the Rolling Stones.
Beatles.
Night owl or early bird?
Early bird. Former postman.
Of course. Fancy restaurant or a takeaway?
Fancy restaurant.
TV or cinema?
TV or
cinema?
TV.
And last one, real book or ebook?
Oh, real book.
I knew I wasn't going to get that. Was the one which actually matters to me.
Tarek's a big ebook advocate, so yeah.
I knew I wasn't going to get an ebook from you.
That's fine. But the sales of ebooks and Kindles has peaked now, which is fine, and people read books and ebooks, don't they? So, but I think no, it's the actual solid book in my hand.
Yeah, no, I do.
Fair enough. Good, fair enough. So another excellent guest, and another one who writes longhand.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. We've had a few guests that do that, and I mean, in Alan's case, it sounds like it's more out of habit than any sort of drafting, purposeful drafting technique. But I can see, from what he was saying and from what other guests have said in the past, that you get a natural redrafting as you transfer that to the computer. You'll automatically go through that drafting process, and that maybe lets you have a cleaner draft at the end of all.
Yeah, it's funny. I think what's always put me off wanting to handwrite stuff is it seems to me that it would be a lot slower to write that first draft, but I think you would make up for that time probably in the second or third drafts, because as you say, you're almost editing it as you type it. So you'd almost, I think the improvements would be much more noticeable doing that. But for me, I just can't get past that. The length. I'm such a slow handwriter. Also, I'm not sure I'll be able to read it back. you know.
Well, for me, I'm so conscious that I'm going to change stuff that I'm always hesitant to actually start even writing longhand. You know what I mean, though? Because you're sort of, you've got this idea and you start writing it and immediately cross it out, and then you want to revise it. Whereas it's easier just to type stuff out and then you can cut and paste it on the screen. But you know, everyone's got their own technique, and it obviously works for him. Although, as he says, he might move on to just try to do it on the computer full time.
It's something which maybe I'll give it a try one day. But I can't see myself doing it. I also just not a very good handwriter. It's dreadful handwriting. I will not be able to read it again when I come to type up.
So you have to write the book twice, essentially. I thought it was interesting as well what he was saying about being on the Steve Wright show and being asked, "What are you doing now?" And when he said writing, there was the automatic response of, "What are you really doing?" As if writing isn't a real thing.
Yeah, it's definitely it's one of these careers that's definitely viewed by people as writing's not a proper job, or
so like
you can do that
little thing you do in the
exactly in the evening. You write your little books. You can do that after dinner, you know. But it's just funny because you would never say that to someone like Stephen King or J.K. Rowling. You know, you can imagine being like, what do you actually do? It's like, oh, I actually write books. Yeah, it's a funny way it's viewed by people, I think.
And actually, I think sometimes, unless you are a Stephen King or Neil Gaiman or something, there's, you know, if it is something that you're doing, if you're starting out in writing and you do have another job at the time, then I think you can be hesitant to say that you write because you have that imposter syndrome sort of writ large at that point because you've not been published, no one's given it to you, so it's sort of something you do want to try and keep to yourself a lot of the time. But anyway, thanks very much, Alan, for taking the time to come onto the podcast. And as we said at the start, you can pick up The Late Train to Gipsy Hill now. So if it sounded good to you, go and grab it from your local bookshop. Next week we have another great guest, though.
The hits keep on coming, Marco. Next week we're chatting with Stuart Turton, who you may know from his award-winning smash first novel, The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, which is a kind of sci-fi twist on an Agatha Christie kind of locked room mystery novel. Really exciting book. And his second one, which is more recently out, The Devil in the Dark Water, which is a kind of historical Sherlock Holmesy story set on a ship, and again is very different in a lot of ways, but equally compelling. Really great.
Yeah. I mean, Stuart was a great guy, really funny and really interesting to speak to. But also, what I took from the conversation was that, you know, he was very determined when he got his agent and his publisher that he would be writing different books every time. He didn't want to be pigeonholed in one sort of genre or category and say, right, this is it, this is what you're writing for the rest of time, kind of a thing, which is quite a brave move to make.
Totally, especially from your first novel. When, as you say, you're kind of new, you're like an unknown, and to a lot of people, you would sign anything and agree to anything just to get your book out there. So it's a bold move to say no. I'm going to say no to that because I want to have more kind of control. So and it's paid off for them though, because they're both fantastic books and they're both very different, and it's great to see. Yeah,
and they've both been massive hits. Although I think, you know, as Stuart says, his books can be Marmite books because, you know, they do go in places, in directions that people, you know, if you're wanting an Agatha Christie book and it suddenly has this element to it, then you might be put off by that. But other people love them, and I'm definitely in that camp. I particularly love The Devil in the Dark Water. But
yes, me too. That was my favourite. I thought it was absolutely fantastic, that one. Yeah.
But we'll speak more about it next week. So thanks very much for listening to this episode. Before we go, if you enjoyed the episode, it really helps us if you can take a couple of seconds to give us a review or rating on your podcast app like Apple Podcasts, because that helps us climb the charts and that helps us to continue to get great guests.
And of course, if anybody wants to get in touch, they can always drop us a tweet, which is at @right_gear, or an email to podcast@rightgear.co.uk.
But otherwise, have a great week and we'll see you next episode.
See you later.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please leave a comment down below, hit that thumbs up button, and be sure to hit that subscribe button as well so you never miss an episode like these ones below.
And if you want to get in touch, you can always drop us a tweet in the Twitter machine, which is at UKPage1, as evidenced here, and our other social media channels are available.
Otherwise, we hope to see you next episode.
See you later.